Professor Kays, I really enjoyed kind of snooping around here in your back area while you and Sue have been looking at some of your flowers out in the front. And I know I visited your place here on several occasions, and I'm continually amazed at all the things you have going on. Back here, it looks like you do a lot of your work as well as have some other things you enjoy, and you're in the process of dividing some perennials, daylilies here.
Yes, this happens to be daylilies we have here, and they've been in that location now for probably 5 or 6 years, and they're beginning to get too crowded, and you can usually get a tip-off on that. They bloom, but they don't stay in bloom very long. I mean, maybe 3 weeks and they're gone. And this variety, when it isn't that crowded, may bloom for 2.5 months.
And not just daylilies at this time of the year,
Sure.
but there's also other types of perennials that can be divided.
Yes, indeed. The two more notable ones would, of course, be the peonies and the iris. And iris, probably about every 5 years you're going to have to divide them because they do get pretty thick.
Well, I know we read in some literature, in some popular publications particularly, that a good rule of thumb on dividing perennials is if they flower in the spring, you divide in the fall. If they flower in the fall, you divide in the spring. And that does hold true for many of them.
Yes, that's right. It's at a time when they're at the nearest of a resting stage until you get into winter. And we'd like to get them moved at this time of the year so they can reestablish their root system before winter sets in, because we want them to be off to a running start.
And you can treat these pretty rough.
Oh,
really.
indeed so, right.
How are you going to handle these now?
One
that you
like
got them
that,
dug.
right. One like this is a rather good-sized clump. I would prefer that we make that 2 or 3 clumps instead of 1 when we plant it, otherwise it's going to get crowded pretty fast. And I have one here that I've washed off more of the soil to where we can kind of see what they look like. But this is in the lily family, but it does not produce a bulb as we think of it, like a lily bulb. This is the root system here, and they're rather large and thickly fleshed and all, and these are the storage organs of that particular plant. And in order to get this separated, we're going to have to do 2 things: wash off much of the soil, and then work these as best we can. And then when you get to the next point, you're probably going to have to come in with a knife and cut them. You think, oh, that's terrible. Well, yes, you're going to damage some of them, but the portions you have left, which would be a portion like this could make enough for a plant, and this will bloom next year. In planting it, we would want to put them into the ground, right where my dirty fingers are there, about to that level. And whether or not we planted them on a mound or just flat on the ground is going to depend somewhat on whether or not it is a fairly loose soil that drains well, or it's a tighter soil such as clay. I'd go on a mound with clay. I'd probably go flat with the sandier soil, well drained. But this would work just fine. Of the 3 that I mentioned, iris, daylilies, and peonies would require dividing far less. They might go 30 or 40 years before you divide them.
And proper planting depth is much more important with that plant
also.
also.
It's very critical. If the buds on the top end of those roots is more than 2 inches deep, you'll have foliage each year, but you probably won't have blooms. If it were a tight clay soil, I'd probably say cover those buds about 1 inch deep. If it's a sandier soil,
we hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.